drowning in deadlines, swamped with to-dos. Today we're diving into MicroSkills, transforming challenges into opportunities through bite-sized habits, by Adaira Landry and Resa Lewis. So get ready to level up your career game plan.
These authors have this really intriguing idea. They say we can actually train ourselves to handle all those workplace dilemmas better by building up these small, almost like undetectable habits.
Okay, I like where this is going. It's like we're getting a secret weapon for our careers.
Exactly. It's like having a secret weapon for your career. And they don't just skim the surface. The first part dives right into this whole self-care as a power move idea.
Which we need, especially in today's crazy, always-on world.
Right. Because we've all heard the bubble bath and face mask version of self-care. But Landry and Lewis, they go way deeper. They're talking about how self-care is really about building the resilience you need, so you can actually be your best self at work no matter what's thrown at you.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself first.
Exactly. And one of their first suggestions is building what they call a personal board of directors.
I have to admit, that sounds a little intimidating at first.
I get it. It sounds very official. But it's really just about creating your own dream team. Like, think about the people you trust the most, the ones who always have your back, who you can go to for advice or just to vent.
Yeah, those people who just get you.
Exactly. Those are your board members.
And it's so important to have that kind of support system, especially when things get tough at work. There's actually this really powerful story in the book about Adaira Landry. Early in her medical career, she made a medication error. Talk about a high-pressure situation.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's every doctor's worst nightmare.
Right. And it would be so easy to just try to bury that experience and move on. But Landry didn't do that. Instead, she reached out to a trusted colleague for support.
And that's what having this board of directors is all about. It's about having those people you can be vulnerable with, who can help you process those tough moments and learn from them. Because let's face it, we all make mistakes. It's how we handle them that really matters.
It's so true. Okay, so we've got our support system in place. What's next on the self-care checklist?
This one might sound simple, but it can be surprisingly powerful. Gratitude.
Okay, so not just saying please and thank you, although those are important too.
Right. It's about actually cultivating an attitude of appreciation, noticing the good things in your work life, recognizing the contributions of your colleagues.
Which honestly can be a challenge when you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the daily grind and forget about the bigger picture. But Landry and Lewis, they argue that even small acts of gratitude can make a huge difference.
They share this really touching story about Resa Lewis and a mentor who helped her through this really difficult end-of-life conversation with a patient.
Yeah, that's such a powerful example of how important those seemingly small interactions can be.
Right. And what struck me was that years later, Lewis reached out to that mentor to express her gratitude.
He wasn't just a passing thought either. It was this really meaningful exchange.
Exactly. It shows how much those gestures of appreciation can mean. Okay, so we've talked about building a support system and practicing gratitude. What's the next non-negotiable for upping our self-care game?
This one's probably not going to be a surprise, but it's probably the one we're most guilty of neglecting. Sleep.
Okay, that's fair. I'm definitely guilty of
Me
that.
too. But Landry and Lewis, they're adamant that sleep is not a luxury. It's essential, especially if you want to function at your best in a demanding job.
So burning the midnight oil is not something to brag about.
No, definitely not. In fact, Lewis talks about how pushing herself to the limit early in her career almost destroyed her health. She was constantly exhausted. Her mood was all over the place. And she wasn't thinking clearly. It wasn't until she started prioritizing sleep that things really turned around for her.
It's a good reminder that we're not machines. We need to recharge and refuel. So before we dive into taming that to-do list, any final thoughts on this whole self-care thing?
I think what surprised me most is that self-care isn't selfish at all. It's actually essential for showing up as our best selves, both at work and in life.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It's about investing in ourselves so we can show up fully for everything else.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got our self-care toolkit in hand. Feels like a good starting point.
It really does.
But now for the million-dollar question, how do we actually wrangle that to-do list? It feels like mine just multiplies overnight.
It can definitely feel like an uphill battle. But luckily, Landry and Lewis give us some pretty solid strategies in the next section. They call it taming your to-do list like a pro.
Okay, color me intrigued. Lay it on me.
So one of the things they emphasize is the importance of ruthless prioritization.
Ruthless. I like it. It sounds a little scary, though.
It's not about being mean, it's about being strategic. They actually make this great analogy to triage in an emergency room.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Lewis talks about how in the ER, doctors have to make these split-second decisions, like who needs immediate attention and who can afford to wait a little bit.
And those decisions literally have life or death consequences. Now,
Exactly. And while most of our to-do lists aren't a matter of life or death, the principle is the same.
so it's about figuring out what's truly important and focusing on that first.
Exactly. If we're constantly reacting to the loudest or most urgent demands, we never have time for the things that really move the needle.
Which I am so guilty of,
Yeah.
especially with email and Slack constantly blowing up.
It's so easy to get caught in that trap. But one thing that can help is aligning your priorities with the goals of your boss or your team.
So it's about seeing the bigger picture, not just checking off boxes.
Exactly. And they have this great story about Landry preparing for a seminar with a colleague. The colleague was getting super caught up in all the logistics, like
Yeah.
the invitations and the food and all that stuff.
Details.
Yeah. But Landry was focused on what she knew their supervisor really cared about. Was the research solid? And were they going to make valuable connections at the event?
I'm guessing that strategic approach paid off.
It totally did.
Yeah.
Not only did it save her time and stress, but it also impressed her supervisor because it showed that she understood the bigger picture and was thinking strategically.
Okay, so ruthless prioritization and aligning with those bigger goals. What else do we need to know?
This one's a big one, setting realistic timelines.
Oh my gosh, that is my downfall.
Yeah.
I am the queen of underestimating how long things will take.
Yeah, me both. But it's something that Landry and Lewis emphasize over and over again. They even have a whole anecdote about Landry prepping for this huge presentation at Harvard. And she was really feeling the pressure, but instead of leaving everything to the last minute, she broke the whole process down into these manageable chunks, from outlining to drafting to practicing, and she gave herself realistic deadlines for each stage.
So she created her own roadmap, basically.
Exactly. And the result was that she delivered an amazing presentation that she felt really good about.
Okay, ruthless prioritization, realistic timelines. What's the final piece of the puzzle for conquering that to-do list?
This one can be tough, but it's so important knowing your limits and when to say no.
Easier said than done, right?
It can be,
Yeah.
but it's essential for protecting your time, your energy, and your sanity.
So how do we get better at saying no without feeling guilty or like we're letting people down?
Well, Landry and Lewis, they emphasize the importance of understanding what resources you need to do your best work, and then having the courage to advocate for yourself.
Which I think can be especially challenging early in your career when you're trying to prove yourself.
Absolutely. But they share this really interesting story about Landry spearheading a podcast project. And she had these really ambitious goals. She wanted it to be huge, like on NPR.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right. But as she got deeper into the project, she realized that she'd underestimated the technical aspects of audio production. It was just way more than she could handle with her current resources and expertise.
So what did she do?
She made the tough call to scale back the project.
Which I'm sure was a difficult decision.
I'm sure it was. But it was also the right one. It's a good reminder that sometimes saying no to a project, or at least reevaluating its scope, is the best way to protect your energy and your sanity in the long run.
And sometimes saying no to one thing means you can say yes to something even better down the line.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered self-care and we've tackled the to-do list. What's next on the agenda for leveling up our career game?
I'm thinking we have to talk about communication because those skills feel so crucial in any job.
You're absolutely right. And that's what we'll dive into next with the book section, Communication That Clicks.
So how do we deal with complaints in a way that actually strengthens our reputation instead of hurting it?
Yeah, it's not about avoiding complaints altogether, because let's face it, those are going to happen no matter what you do.
True enough.
What Landry and Lewis really emphasize is the importance of handling complaints constructively.
Which I'm guessing is easier said than done.
It definitely takes practice. But the key is to approach complaints with empathy and a focus on finding solutions. They actually share a really insightful example from Landry's own experience.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Landry was leading this team, and there was one team member who had a habit of airing grievances in a way that was super disruptive.
Oh, I've totally worked with people like that. It's like they thrive on drama.
Right. And it would have been easy for Landry to just write this person off as difficult, but instead she took a completely different approach. She sat down with this team member one-on-one, and she actually coached them on how to communicate their concerns in a more constructive way.
Wow. So she basically gave them the tools to be a better communicator.
Exactly. And it worked. Not only did it improve the team dynamics, but it also showed that Landry was the kind of leader who valued open and honest communication.
That's amazing. It's like she turned a potentially negative situation into a positive one.
Exactly. And speaking of turning negatives into positives, Landry and Lewis, they're big believers in the power of honesty.
Which seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But I guess it's easy to let little white lies slip in, especially when you're feeling stressed or pressured.
Oh, absolutely. But they argue that even small acts of dishonesty can really damage your reputation in the long run. They tell this story about a resident who lied about performing a routine medical procedure.
Oh, wow. That's a big one. What happened?
Well, it created this whole chain reaction of mistrust and suspicion within the hospital.
It's a good reminder that honesty really is the best policy.
It really is. And that it's not just about those big moral dilemmas either. It's about being truthful in all your interactions, big or small.
So we've talked about handling deadlines gracefully, dealing with complaints constructively, and being radically honest. Any other tips for building a reputation that will open doors?
You know, the biggest takeaway for me from this section was the idea that our reputations are built one interaction at a time.
Like every conversation, every email, every meeting matters.
Exactly. So show up consistently, act with integrity, and those small actions will add up over time.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today, but there's one last piece of the puzzle we need to talk about. Conflict.
Ah, yes, conflict. The dreaded C word.
It feels unavoidable though, right?
Yeah.
Like no matter how hard you try, there are always going to be disagreements and misunderstandings.
That's true. But Landry and Lewis, they offer this really interesting perspective. They argue that conflict doesn't have to be a negative thing. In fact, it can actually be an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding.
Okay, I like that reframing. But how do we actually get there? How do we turn conflict into something positive?
Well, they start by emphasizing the importance of recognizing those early warning signs that something's not quite right.
So being able to spot conflict before it blows up into a big thing.
Exactly. And they have this really relatable story about Landry working at a test prep company. She was dealing with this parent who was unhappy about a policy. And the parent never actually complained directly to Landry, but she started making these little passive-aggressive comments, those subtle digs that are just kind of under the surface.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's
Yeah.
like they're trying to be polite, but you can tell they're annoyed.
Exactly. And Landry admits that she wishes she'd addressed the situation sooner, because by the time she did, the tension had escalated and it was much harder to resolve.
So the lesson here is don't let things fester.
Exactly. Address conflict early, and you'll have a much better chance of finding a positive resolution.
Okay, so we're on high alert for those early warning signs. What happens when we sense conflict brewing? What do we do?
One thing that Landry and Lewis really emphasize is the importance of acknowledging our own role in the conflict.
Which can be tough.
Yeah.
Right. It's so much easier to just blame the other person.
It really is.
Huh.
But they argue that taking ownership of our actions, even if we feel like we're in the right, can really help to de-escalate the situation.
It's like saying, hey, I'm not perfect here. I'm open to hearing your perspective.
Exactly. And they have this great anecdote from Landry's residency, where she had this tense interaction with a colleague. And the colleague did end up apologizing, but Landry also acknowledged that her response could have been better.
So it was a two-way street.
Exactly. And that mutual understanding really helped them to move forward.
Okay, so acknowledge our own role.
Yeah.
Check. What else?
They also talk about the importance of a sincere apology.
Not the I'm sorry, but kind of apology.
Right, exactly. A real, genuine apology can go a long way in repairing relationships.
So much harder to do than to say, but I'm sure it makes a world of difference.
It really does. And finally, they suggest seeking feedback from trusted colleagues or mentors, especially if you find yourself in similar conflict situations over and over again.
Like that saying, if you meet one jerk, they're a jerk. If you meet jerks all day, you're the jerk.
Exactly. Sometimes we all have blind spots, and an outside perspective can be really helpful.
It's all about self-awareness,
Oh,
right?
actually.
Well, we covered a lot of ground today. We talked about self-care, productivity, communication, reputation building, and even conflict resolution.
It's like the ultimate toolkit for career success.
Right. And the best part is that all these micro skills, they're things we can start implementing today.
Exactly. It's not about making these huge sweeping changes overnight. It's about incorporating these small intentional shifts in our behavior that can lead to big results over time.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's your biggest takeaway? What's the one micro skill you're going to focus on incorporating into your own work life?
For me, It's the power of building that personal board of directors, having those trusted people in your corner who you can turn to for support and advice. It's such a game changer.
I love that. And it's something we can all start doing today.
Right.
Who are those people in our lives who inspire us, challenge us, and support us no matter what?
Exactly. And the beauty of micro skills is that they're not about being perfect. It's about continuous improvement, always striving to be a little bit better today than we were yesterday.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into micro skills, transforming challenges into opportunities through bite-sized habits by Adaira Landry and Resa Lewis. If you're ready to level up your career game plan, be sure to check out their book. It's packed with even more practical advice and real-life stories that you can apply to your own work life. Until next time, keep those micro skills sharp.